Hey guys, we are coming live. This is the first episode of the Gut Health Gurus podcast, and we thought that the first episode will be all about anxiety and depression and the link on gut health. So I'm Kriben Govender. For those who don't know me, I'm a food scientist and digestive health advocate and founder of Nourish Me Organics. And we have my colleague, James Shadrach. James?
Hey, yeah, so I'm James. So I'm well into the gut health scene. Mainly got in because of the anxiety side of it and the health and optimization. So I have a background in psychology and an honors degree in psychology. And I'm really passionate about gut health and specifically the mental health aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. So James, with your time so far here with us at Nourish Me Organics, what has been your takeaway from a psychological perspective, coming from that psychology field, and quite an abstract link, I guess, back in those early days when you first studied between the gut and the mind. So what's your thoughts on that?
I think it's huge. I think, first of all, I'm just amazed by how much new research is coming out. So I'm constantly looking through new articles that are published like either this month or last month with these new breakthroughs. So I think for starters, it's still showing there's a lot that we don't know about this area, which is just, it's incredible. So I think from the anxiety part of it and the mental health aspect, all I know is for me, like when I was younger, I just ate horribly, really bad diet, only like the most restricted diet. I was just such a picky eater. Like get this, all I really wanted to eat was just plain foods, like plain pasta with just a little bit of salt and butter and just plain rice. I was such a weirdo, but that was my thing. I was particular about it. Like I didn't want pasta sauce. I just wanted like plain food. And I'd make my parents give me that stuff. So restricted diet, lots of like overly processed foods, lots of like chocolate and white bread and stuff like that. And, looking back when that was my diet, I just felt horrible all the time. Just like in this mental funk, and I was just feeling awful, really. And looking back, what I now know, it seems that a lot of that was to do with diet and my gut health. My gut was just in turmoil. Antibiotics too. Anytime I was sick, parents would send me straight to the doctors, go for a round of antibiotics, and that was frequent, like multiple times throughout the year. So looking back, I think that accounts for why I felt so awful all the time. But ever since I got into more of the gut health and started eating cleaner, healthier foods, I feel great.
Great. No, I have noticed a shift. I guess since you first started with this, you had the gut testing, you started to incorporate more fermented type foods to your diet. So I'm not surprised that you're starting to notice the actual feeling of that difference. In terms of your mental clarity, has there been any improvements?
Yeah, like I think I used to just be in a fog all the time. Just this low-level haze and kind of a fog. And I really believe that was because of how my gut microbiome was just being damaged all the time by the foods I was eating.
Totally. And James, I can resonate with you. I mean, I think a lot of people know my story. About 7 years ago, I struggled extremely badly with anxiety and depression, and it was really on the verge of suicide. My life had collapsed. I found myself alone in an apartment, ready to end my life. And I think back then I'd been in the food industry now for a good 20 years, but I was just at that point starting to establish that gut-brain connection. And the first thing I did was go to a psychologist, and the psychologist was like, "Oh, you need to go onto Prozac or Zoloft or something like that." But I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to explore a natural way to do it because I looked at the side effects and it didn't really resonate with me. So initially I did some pretty cool work with a psychologist on just expressing exactly how I felt. And I think even regressing back to some childhood traumas that really helped me significantly. And I remember the psychologist actually telling me to, because I had some issues with workplace bullying at that time that was causing a lot of mental issues for me. No one likes to be bullied, especially not in the workplace by your boss. It's not a good thing. So she actually got me to like visualize like a pillow, and she rolled up this piece of paper and she said, now have a conversation with your boss, and your boss is this pillow.
Right.
So I got this rolled up piece of paper and I had this conversation with my boss about exactly how I felt about it. And I proceeded to beat the living hell out of this pillow. And the end of it, the paper, that rolled up piece of paper, was just shreds. And my hands were actually dripping blood.
Wow.
But it was so cathartic. It was like so cathartic, just to get all those emotions out. And I think we were starting to understand the link between gut and brain. But I think there's also a place for dealing with trauma from the past, like childhood traumas, anything that's causing, like sitting in your subconscious mind, that's affecting you, how you feel. And things like the Landmark program. I think you've just been through the Landmark program, and I've been through it myself. And it was hugely healing for me, because for me, it helped me to deal with a lot of the issues with my mother. And all the feelings of animosity that I had with my mother growing up, because I felt like she favored my brother. And that was like almost like a story that I held for my whole life, that I wasn't good enough because my brother was favored. But really going through the Landmark program, and that was probably a good 6 years ago when I went through it. Hugely healing to the psyche of having belief in myself and feeling that I'm actually good enough. But I know that you've been through it, so what's your feelings about the Landmark program?
Man, I think it's awesome. I think it just goes to show how much of your life you can spend holding on to just past negativity. And it's crazy because I got this odd feeling that was similar to the Matrix, just going through their programs. And I felt like I just didn't realize how much negativity I was holding on to, or how much meaning and how much story I was giving everything. And it's just like a really cathartic feeling, just letting all that go, letting go of the story, because it doesn't really help anyone.
Exactly. And I think that whole element of story and how we frame our reality and how we perceive things. And I did read a book a couple of years ago, The Charisma Myth. I'm not sure you've come across it. The Charisma Myth. I'm blanking on the author, Olivia Fox-Cabane. Fantastic book. And it's pretty much around charisma, but she has a section in it when she talks about this, being on a highway, and then you've got this black car that speeds in front of you and cuts you off, and you're seething, you're like, what is this person doing? They're cutting me off, and you have all this anger towards this person. But the way she framed it was, in actual fact, there was a lady in that car who had a sick child, or something along, I'm paraphrasing. There was a sick child, and she's rushing to hospital, and she's desperate to save her child's life, or something along those lines. But we perceive it as being something, the story that we create is that this person is doing me wrong. But when we actually reframe things, it's extremely powerful. Because if you think about it, most of the way you live your life is in storyland. You're making some judgment or some perception on a frame that you have. But if we're deluding ourselves all the time, how about we delete ourselves in a positive way? How about we think about the best in people? How about we find gratitude? And that's, for me, dealing with mental trauma, mental illness, depression, anxiety, has been one of the fundamental things that have helped me to deal. And it seems simple, like things like meditation, dealing with anxiety and depression. I remember I was being counseled when I was going through issues with my boss. And this was the first time that I actually sat down in a guided meditation. And so imagine someone that's lived their life always feeling this low level anxiety, always feeling an edge. And just doing a simple 5-minute guided meditation with this counselor just helped me feel a lot more present and a lot more grounded, and that anxiety just lifted.
Yeah.
And that lasted for a good hour, 2 hours afterwards. And that was the first time I experienced that.
Wow.
Any experience with meditation or anything like that?
It's incredible. Yeah. It really does come down to so much of the meaning and stories that we give things. Like when I was at that actual program, I was talking to one of the people I was in a group with.
This is the landmark.
Yeah. And there was this, a guy came up and started talking to the person I was talking to and cut off our conversation. And he did it once, and then he did it again. And normally for me, I just wouldn't say anything, but because of all the work I'd done through the course, I realized, well, if I'm upset about something, I have to express it. So I just tapped him on the shoulder. I was like, hey, excuse me, you're completely cutting off this conversation. Can you please stop? And he just said yes. Then he walked away. And I didn't really think much about it, but later in the course, he came back to me and he just kind of said, oh, hey, thanks so much for doing that, because, you know, I was going to get really angry about it, but, you know, great. And it just kind of hit me that, well, his perception of everything was completely different to mine. Like, he kind of walked off, but I was just saying, hey, stop. You can be part of the conversation. You're not wrong. You're not bad. But his whole mind was seeing that he's the bad guy and he's done something wrong.
And so he walked off.
So he walked off. And it just goes to show my meaning is so different to his, but each person acts as though it's true. Like, if you think you're worthless, that's your reality and that's what you think is true. But another person could look at the situation and be like, no, like, that's not true at all. But you can get so caught up in your own view or your own reality of what you think is true.
Totally. And also the masks that we wear.
Yeah.
And this brings me to another, I guess, key reason how I managed to deal with anxiety and depression. And we will get to the gut health. It's so important. But the other thing was doing acting training. And I know you've been to a couple of Claire D's Meisner training as well. And I found that learning how to act is so counterintuitive, because you perceive acting as pretend. But from learning the craft of acting, it actually teaches you how to be yourself and to accept all of you and all your shades and colors. And so, you know, when we have this feeling of not being good enough, or it's almost then we create like a mask on top to hide that part of ourselves, because we think that's a deficiency. But I think there's incredible strength that comes from accepting all of you, all your colors, you know, all your different shades. Like, I mean, how boring would the world be? But it's all those individual, you know, pieces of ourselves that, I mean, I don't think there's really just one you. There's all these different parts of you that you bring out in different situations. And I think that acting really helped me to embrace the darkness and the light, you know, because it's all part of me.
Cool. So acting lets you, or I guess, like, delve into all those different sides of yourself and then accept them as well.
Totally. And very similar to the exercise that we had with the psychologist. We had this exercise called, it wasn't Private Moment. I'm blanking. It was set up in a way that you're having a conversation with someone that has impacted your life in some way. So it can be positive or negative. Typically, I would tend to go into the negative places. So you choose another actor, and they would embody the person that you have this conflict with. And it was actually my late brother that I had a lot of, I guess, conflict growing up with. And so we had some actors that would play my brother, and I would have a conversation with him. But it was like just me speaking 100% for myself, truthfully, authentically. But even though it's an imagined circumstance, it's almost like you're talking to him. So there's some conflict resolution that happens because you're holding all the conflict inside of you. But then having that conversation with him it can fully express. And when you express that emotion, it can shift and change. So that's how powerful I think a lot of like mental issues and depression and anxiety happen because there's unresolved emotions trapped inside our body. So this is another very powerful way to actually let that shift and change and resolve, because the body can't really tell between what's imagined and what's real.
Yep.
So it's like watching a really scary movie. So your body is reacting in a way that it's in danger. Like you're watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or something, and you're feeling all the emotions like this killer is going to actually be endangering your life.
Yeah.
So in a similar vein, it's like when I'm having this conversation with this actor that's playing my brother, it's like me talking to him, so my body can actually resolve.
Yeah, wow. It's amazing. Interesting point for the actor as well, to kind of step into that. It's like they're doing a massive favor for you.
Totally. And I mean, sometimes I play the actor for someone else.
Yeah.
And I remember going through some exercises where, I was like playing someone's boyfriend who had cheated on them, and then this actress is like fully yelling at me. And then I have to fully embody that and take that on as an actor. Wow. But it was such a gift for me, and I think I felt very grateful to be able to be the gift for the other person to actually receive as well, to help them deal with their traumas.
I think that's a big part of it too, like just being or playing with those emotions, embracing them. I think a lot of people just kind of go through their life really dull to any type of emotion. It's kind of like flatlining the whole time. I think there's real power in like letting those emotions out and experiencing and expressing them, like in a safe environment, like expressing anger or expressing sadness or having a really deep conversation with somebody, or even joy. I think a lot of people are just kind of flatlining. I don't think that's good for mental health at all.
I totally agree, James. I think, well, even anger, which is perceived as something quite negative, is extremely powerful when expressed in a safe way, because your anger is actually telling your psyche, your body, that you're not happy with something.
Yeah.
So when we suppress things like that, the classic mask that people wear, I think, is the people pleaser.
Yeah.
And it's like when they live, and this was me to a T, like wanting to always please everybody and not rock the boat and have everybody like you. But that's extremely, extremely stifling. And I think it's one of the reasons why I always felt anxious, because I always felt like I was looking for approval. Approval, maybe it's related to the issues I had with my mum of not feeling good enough. But it was like always seeking approval. And I mean, to wear a fake smile all day is extremely draining. And I think very damaging for your psyche.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's just that, to learning how to be authentic and be fully accepting of yourself, and be fully okay that not everybody is going to like you, and be totally okay with that. That's extremely empowering.
Totally agree.
How about we shift gears? Is there any other strategies you think from your psychology training that you have that may help people that are listening, that are dealing with some form of mental illness, anxiety, depression?
Yeah, look, I've read so much on psychology and mental health, and I've looked at so many different books and different authors. One of the most powerful concepts I've found is by a guy called Ellis. And he's passed now, but he was a really powerful psychologist, and he came up with what's called rational emotive behavioral therapy. I think that's it. But basically his idea was unconditional self-love. And he was saying the issue that people have is that they put conditions on the love that they give themselves. So I'll love myself if I do this. I'll love myself if I'm successful. I'll love myself if I am healthy, or if I have a lot of money. And what he was saying is all those ifs or conditions that you put on yourself create so much pain, so much anxiety and suffering. But the flip side of looking at it is that I will love and accept myself regardless of the condition. So even if I mess things up, and even if I'm not the healthiest version of myself right now, I still accept myself. And I found that extremely powerful, and especially coming from a really challenging place. If outwardly your life really is not in a good place, like if you're struggling with your health, struggling with your finances, and you don't really see anything going that well, even if you can accept and love yourself, and that's such a powerful place to come from, and then you really can move forward. So for me, that would be the most powerful thing that I've learned from all my studies.
Wow. That's profound. I mean, I think it comes back to be fully accepting of yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, warts and all. Just, you're an individual, you're a beautiful person, you are here to serve your purpose, you are enough.
Yeah.
And just having that realization, that acceptance, cutting through all the stories that you've been telling yourself that have been negative is hugely beneficial and hugely healing. And I think by having full acceptance of oneself, you can fully serve and fully help others without being stifled, by being stuck in your head. And this comes back to some strategies that I learnt as well in acting training, where I think a lot of the times when we struggle with anxiety and depression is because we're stuck in our heads. It's the other mask that people normally wear is called a critic.
Yeah, okay.
It's that little voice in your head that talks to you. Why did I say that? Oh, I'm not good enough. It's that voice that's kind of like judging you or criticizing you, and that's that critic.
Yep.
So to deal with the critic, I found that dropping into my body really helps silence that voice. Because I really think we have very different parts of our brain. I think being in our body, we know the gut has a separate enteric nervous system.
Yeah, right.
But I think there's also different parts of your brain and different, like there's theories on it. You've got the frontal lobe, which is the thinking side, and you've got the reptilian brain, which is more the primal side, and then the mammalian brain, which is more your emotional side. And I think dropping more into that body side, which is your emotional side of your brain, that frees you from that critic. And some strategies that have really helped me to deal with that is simple things like exercise, like going to the gym, having a hard, high intensity training session helps me to get out of my head and into my body. And another one that really helps me is doing yoga. So when you're listening intently on what that teacher is telling you and you don't want to mess up, because you're so in tune to your listening and making sure you're following the poses, and the poses themselves might have been having some benefits, but I find that it helps me drop into my body, and I know when after the class is finished, I feel very free and liberated, and energetically I feel very different. Have you had any experiences with exercise or yoga?
Yeah, I mean, my thing's jiu-jitsu. And that's, a grappling type of martial arts, and you're sparring with people, and they're really trying to get you. So it's a competitive situation you're in. And for me, there's nothing else that I think of when I'm on the mat, because it's a really intense situation that you have to deal with. But I have complete clarity. I'm not thinking about, business stuff that I need to do, or work that I need to do, or bills or anything. And I feel, just really refreshed out of that. I've gotten somewhat with exercise, but the training with martial arts has taken it to a whole nother level, because you don't have room to think about anything else.
There could be some, I think, impact of hormones as well, because I think when you exercise, it releases endorphins. So this is another way to kind of stimulate the way your body feels by doing exercise to release endorphins. A really funny thing that helps me really drop into my body is having an ice cold shower. So like typically when I have to run workshops, I will have a 5.5 minute ice cold shower. I start hot, so it's nice and comfortable and warm, and I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, and then I just quickly turn the water on ice cold. And it's really tough in winter, but I tell you what, I feel so euphoric after having an ice cold shower. And it could be like even doing ice plunges that can help shift that state in your body. It could also be something like sauna as well. That's the opposite spectrum, where you're using heat to warm up your body, and there's all sorts of health benefits as well from doing sauna. Or you can do hot cold as well. So I find that very interesting. But this brings me back to, I guess, the main thing that impacts me, and I guess how I found out about, how to heal the body and heal the depression and anxiety symptoms that I had via the gut. And a huge part of it is actually diet. Diet. And, science is evolving all the time. And I mean, the microbiome, all the research happening on the gut bacteria, the neurotransmitters they produce. I'm not sure whether you're aware, James, that about 90% of serotonin, which is your feel-good hormone, is actually produced in the gut.
Yeah, wow.
And a lot of these drugs work by, like Prozac, Zoloft, work by keeping serotonin in the system longer. So that's how they manage to elevate serotonin levels. So, but the serotonin is actually produced 90% by gut bacteria, and 50% of dopamine, which is another neurotransmitter, GABA, acetylcholine, produced in the gut, primarily by gut bacteria and the gut epithelial cells, so the gut cells themselves. So how do we manipulate the biome to feel better?
And it's a really interesting conversation it becomes now, because neurotransmitters contribute to how we feel and our mental health, and if so much of that is controlled by your gut health, then the conversation moves to, hey, if we can fix our gut health, maybe we can fix some of these mental health problems that we're having.
Totally. I've seen studies come out of Korea, it was a couple of months ago, where they managed to actually predict whether a person is more neurotic versus conscientious via the types of bacteria in their gut.
Wow.
So this is how staggering it is. And this is where the science is headed. And you might have heard terms like psychobiotics, things that are used to actually stimulate gut bacteria to improve mental health. And I think there's going to be an explosion of these type of products coming as well, which is amazing.
Incredible. I mean, even with the neuroticism and conscientious idea, those two are, personality traits that have been studied extensively. And basically all people, at least in the Western world where it's been studied, will fall somewhere on those different continuums. So you can be low conscientiousness or high conscientiousness, same with low or high neuroticism. But that's consistent with people in general. Like, we find that something that everybody has, there's like 5 different factors or so. But if you can find that out from the gut, I mean, that is incredible. That's kind of like giving a basis for who we are and the way we act from looking at your gut. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited by the science, because the gut bacteria can actually communicate with the brain. This is what science is showing us. Because you've got an enteric nervous system. So you've got all these nerves and neurons in your gut, as much as a small cat. So, and these two systems, the brain and the enteric nervous system, operate very differently. So by using, I guess, food as a start, this is a very low-hanging fruit. By changing our diets to eat a lot more cleaner and cultivate, I guess, a more diverse gut bacteria, I think that goes a long way in improving mental health. I think that's a really good place to start, because I think if we look at, firstly, how we can take out the things that are disruptive to the gut microbiome, and then start to incorporate things that are beneficial for a gut microbiome, especially encouraging diversity. So lots of different types, because all these different strains of bacteria have different purposes. Some produce neurotransmitters, others help us digest food, others produce vitamins and other important metabolites like butyrate that are all beneficial to the body. So I think it's really exciting for me that science has come so far, in a sense where 8-9 years ago, there wasn't much information coming out about this impact on gut and brain. But now we see new studies coming out every month about how substantial this actually is. So, things like kefir. Kefir in Turkish actually means feel good. So even though it's, thousands and thousands of years old, I guess the people of the Caucasus Mountains, where these things have originated from, kind of felt better when they were having these things. So it's incredible. And Ellie Metchnikoff, in the very early 1900s, even started to establish longevity in finding pockets of people in Bulgaria and whatnot that were living over 100 because they're consuming a lot of these health-giving probiotic-type foods.
Wow.
So not only good for, mental health overall, longevity, so critical.
Yeah, it's incredible. So what would you say are some of the things, or I guess, what damages the biome? What should we avoid, if anything?
Great question. I think if we look at the science, there's some clear ones out there. I think processed foods are number one.
Question for that one. So what do we mean by processed foods? How do we break that down?
Simple. A processed food is anything that's been, adulterated substantially from its natural form. So you think about something like a condiment, and the way you establish that is you look at the ingredient list and you can see, it's got all these additives and E-numbers. Something like tomato sauce, it's processed, it's pasteurized. The cooking process is not the issue. It's just that food companies need to have shelf stability. They have a supply chain. They've got to keep it around longer because the longer shelf life equals dollars for them. So shelf life, so anything that needs a substantial shelf life is going to have additives in there to actually keep it around longer.
Right, okay. And is